It was a Sunday that began like any other. In Montgomery, Alabama, the summer heat had begun to settle. The air was thick but still. The city was quiet, tucked into the stillness of late evening. Neighborhoods buzzed with the faint murmur of televisions behind screen doors. Porch lights flicked on one by one, and families prepared for the week ahead. It was the kind of day where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen, at least not here. For Linda Lamonte, a 31-year-old single mother, it was a typical weekend winding down. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. She worked hard, provided for her 2 children, 10-year-old Sheila and 6-year-old Aaron, and was doing her best to build something resembling a future. She had recently let someone into that life, a man named Raymond Eugene Brown. To most people around her, he seemed like a second chance. Soft-spoken, polite, gainfully employed, and steady. Linda's friends and family noticed she smiled more around him, that perhaps she was trying once again to believe in love. But beneath that facade was a darkness that no one could see coming. When Monday morning arrived, Linda's absence was the first red flag. She never missed work without calling in. Her daughter, Sheila, a bright, outspoken girl, didn't show up for school. Her teachers noticed immediately. Calls went unanswered. Doors knocked went unopened. Hours passed. Anxiety grew. By the afternoon, Linda's parents made the decision to check in. What they found would rupture the stillness of that peaceful neighborhood forever. Inside the apartment, nothing looked out of place at first. No broken glass, no overturned furniture, no sounds of distress. But something was off. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel calm, it feels wrong. Her father called out her name. No answer. Then they walked into the living room. What they saw defied comprehension. Linda's body was sprawled and mutilated, beyond what any mind could prepare for. A Polaroid photograph, freshly taken, was taped to the television screen, capturing her corpse from just hours earlier. On the floor were scattered playing cards and a note, handwritten, almost childlike, with the names Linda and Sheila scrawled beside a chilling third word, me. In the adjacent bedroom, they found young Sheila. Her body, too, had been violated and butchered. She had been stabbed repeatedly, the knife still embedded in her chest. Her 6-year-old brother Aaron, miraculously, had been left unharmed, curled in a corner, paralyzed by fear, but alive. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows, nothing to suggest a struggle had taken place. It was as if the killer had walked in calmly and walked out just the same. But this was not the work of a stranger. It was intimate, it was personal, and it was savage. Police were immediately called. Their investigation began swiftly. The apartment was cordoned off, and officers started piecing together the early fragments of the puzzle. Who had access? Who had motive? Who had the capacity for this kind of rage? The answer, it seemed, had been living there the entire time. It didn't take long for investigators to learn about Raymond Eugene Brown. He wasn't just Linda's boyfriend. He had been at the apartment when Aaron was last seen by his father, who had dropped the boy off earlier that weekend. Now, Brown was nowhere to be found. As police began tracing his history, what they uncovered left even hardened investigators shaken. Raymond Eugene Brown had a past, a horrifying one. Nearly 3 decades earlier, in a different Alabama town, he had murdered 3 members of his own family. At the time, he was just 14 years old. His grandmother, his great-grandmother, slaughtered in their own home. He was supposed to spend the rest of his life in prison. But somehow, inexplicably, he had been released. Now 2 more lives were gone. Another child left motherless. And Raymond was on the run. What drove this man to kill? What kind of darkness survives nearly 30 years behind bars, and then reemerges in a peaceful home without warning? And more chillingly, how had no one seen it coming? To understand how Raymond Eugene Brown ended up at the center of one of Alabama's most brutal family murders, and how he would go on to kill again, you have to go back to a quiet, rural corner of Clay County. It was 1960. Raymond was just 14 years old. From the outside, he seemed like the last person anyone would suspect. Born on January 11, 1946, in Ashland, Alabama, Raymond was one of 4 boys in a tight-knit, church-going family. His parents, Marvin and Emma Lou Brown, were respected in the community. Raymond played junior varsity football at Clay County High, was well-liked, and came across as the all-American boy. There were no signs, no warnings, no red flags. Teachers described him as polite. Friends said he was easy to be around. He was just a normal teenager trying to find his way, or so it seemed. But on the night of October 1st, 1960, something snapped. Raymond had been wanting a pair of football cleats. His family couldn't afford them, and instead of asking for help or working to save up, the 14-year-old made a chilling decision. He would break into the home of relatives, his own family, to steal money. Late that night, Raymond crept through the back door of a house shared by 3 women. His aunt, Berta Mae Martin, age 31. His grandmother, Ethel Ogle, age 63. And his great-grandmother, Evelina Ogle, age 82, who was bedridden and disabled. The house was quiet. The women were asleep. He moved through the kitchen searching for cash. But he wasn't quiet enough. His aunt, Berta Mae, heard something and got up to investigate. That's when everything changed. Confronted in the dark, Raymond panicked, or perhaps he had already made up his mind. Grabbing a kitchen knife, he stabbed his aunt. Once, then again, and again. When it was over, she had been stabbed many times. The attack was frenzied, savage. It went far beyond silencing a witness. This was rage, and it didn't stop there. He moved through the house, entering the bedrooms where his grandmother and great-grandmother were sleeping. He stabbed them both repeatedly. As if that weren't enough, he slit their throats from ear to ear post-mortem. When the sun rose the next morning, the rooms were soaked in blood. 3 women, 3 generations, gone. And the killer? A child. Their own blood. It was Raymond's mother who discovered the scene. She had gone to visit and found a silence so heavy. She knew something was wrong before even opening the door. What she saw inside would haunt her for the rest of her life. She called police in hysterics. When authorities arrived, the horror was immediate. There was no sign of forced entry, but there were bloody heel prints, too small to belong to an adult man. Soon, suspicions narrowed. Raymond was picked up at school 5 days later, in the gymnasium. He didn't fight. He didn't run. At the station, he confessed, calmly detailing how he had committed the murders. His fingerprints matched those found in the house. The town was stunned. The story exploded across Alabama. Reporters poured into Ashland. So did hundreds of curiosity seekers, souvenir hunters, who tried to break into the murder house, just to collect items touched by blood. Police had to post guards outside the home to hold back the crowds. It wasn't just a crime. It had become a spectacle. The legal battle that followed was heated. Alabama law allowed juveniles to be tried as adults. Prosecutors saw no ambiguity. This was a deliberate, methodical slaughter. Raymond's defense argued he should be tried in juvenile court. A psychiatric evaluation declared him sane, and ultimately, he was tried as an adult. In court, Raymond sat almost motionless. Emotionless. He sometimes buried his face in his hands, but he never cried, never showed remorse. He was convicted swiftly, but the jury, perhaps swayed by his age, recommended mercy. Instead of the death penalty, Raymond Eugene Brown was given 3 life sentences. And for a while, it seemed justice had been served. The boy who murdered 3 women was now locked away. Forever. The town could grieve. Families could begin to heal. Life, however painfully, would move on. But Raymond wasn't done. Behind bars, he became the model inmate. Quiet, cooperative. He earned a certificate in auto mechanics. He joined rehabilitation programs. He was, by all appearances, reformed. And in 1973, just 13 years after he murdered 3 members of his own family, Raymond Eugene Brown was paroled. Given another chance. To many, it was unthinkable, but it was real. And not long after his release, the darkness began to creep back in. Raymond Eugene Brown walked out of an Alabama prison in 1973. He had served just 13 years for the brutal murders of his aunt, grandmother, and great-grandmother. A triple homicide so savage, so personal, that it stunned an entire state. But there he was, a free man at just 27 years old. And the reason? He had played the long game. Inside prison, Raymond had become what the system wanted to see. Quiet, compliant, and non-threatening. He took classes, attended programs, kept to himself. To parole boards, he looked like a man who had changed. He hadn't. Soon after his release, Raymond began to spiral into the shadows once again. In 1975, just 2 years after he walked free, he was arrested in DeKalb County for a crime that echoed the violence of his past. Only this time, it took a new and horrifying form. He had raped and kidnapped a young woman, forcing her into his car, driving her into the woods, and violently assaulting her. The details were harrowing. The woman survived, but her life would never be the same. Raymond was convicted and sent back to prison, this time for second-degree rape and kidnapping. His sentence? 20 years. The public breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe now, finally, he would be locked away for good. But that hope was short-lived. In 1986, after serving just 11 years of that sentence, Raymond was granted parole again. Twice convicted. First for a triple homicide, then for rape and kidnapping. And still he walked free. It was a baffling decision. Prosecutors would later describe it as a system failure of catastrophic proportions. Yet at the time, Raymond's file showed him once again as a model inmate. He wasn't causing trouble. He'd learned how to game the system. Free again, Raymond moved in with his mother in Lineville, Alabama. By now, he was in his 40s. But the demons inside him had never been tamed, only caged. And freedom gave them room to roam. He lived a quiet life on the surface. But behind closed doors, the darkness that had once gripped him as a teenager began to stir. In early 1990, Raymond started dating a woman named Deborah K. Landis. Debbie was 28. She had 2 daughters from a previous relationship, Kendra, 8, and Tasha, 5. They lived in a modest trailer on Hurst Street in Lineville. To neighbors, they looked like a blended family trying to make it work. But inside that trailer, a nightmare was unfolding. Debbie's family would later say she had begun to fear Raymond. He was controlling, angry, possessive. She wanted out of the relationship. She had told people she was planning to leave, and that decision would cost her life. On March 21, 1990, just after 11 p.m., a fire engulfed Debbie's mobile home. When firefighters arrived, it was already too late. Inside the ruins, they found the burned remains of all 3, Debbie, Kendra, and Tasha. But it wasn't the fire that killed them. An autopsy revealed what the flames had tried to hide. Debbie had been stabbed at least 27 times, her body mutilated with rage. Kendra and Tasha had died of smoke inhalation, trapped inside a trailer that had been intentionally set on fire. Police believe Raymond murdered Debbie, then torched the home with the girls still inside. The motive? Debbie was going to leave him, and Raymond wouldn't allow that. This wasn't just murder. It was premeditated execution. And once again, Raymond targeted those closest to him. Police quickly identified Raymond as the prime suspect, but he wasn't at the scene. He was already gone. He had vanished, slipping through the cracks once again. An all-points bulletin went out. Days passed, then weeks. The manhunt stretched across counties. And then, on March 30th, 9 days after the fire, authorities found Raymond hiding in a trash pile outside a friend's house. He was filthy, dehydrated, and armed, but he didn't resist. As police led him away, a crowd gathered. The town of Lineville, so small, so quiet, had become the epicenter of a horror story. Raymond Eugene Brown was arrested and charged with 3 counts of capital murder. The state made it clear from the beginning they would seek the death penalty. At trial, prosecutors laid out the pattern. A 14-year-old killer released and given a second chance. A convicted rapist released again. A repeat murderer whose final victims were a woman and 2 little girls who trusted him. Jurors saw no ambiguity. They found Raymond Eugene Brown guilty on all counts. And this time there would be no mercy. He was sentenced to death. As he was led out of the courtroom, family members of the victims cried. Others stared silently. Justice, long denied, had finally arrived, but at a terrible cost. Raymond Eugene Brown would sit on death row for years, his appeals dragging on, his story fading from the headlines. But the legacy of his crimes remained. By the time Raymond Eugene Brown was finally sentenced to death in 1992, the damage was done. 6 people were dead. 3 of them, the elderly women he butchered at age 14, were supposed to be protected by the state when he was locked away. The other 3, Deborah K. Landis and her 2 daughters, Kendra and Tasha, were supposed to be protected when that same state let him out. Twice. Raymond Brown wasn't just a killer. He was a product of systemic failure. A man who learned early how to say the right things, behave the right way, and convince authority figures that he changed. Raymond Eugene Brown died on Alabama's death row in 2008. No final statement, no apology, no remorse. He exited this world as he lived in it, quietly violent, hidden behind a mask of normalcy, leaving behind a trail of lives shattered in silence. But long after his final breath, the echoes of his crimes continue to haunt those who knew his victims, and those who tried to stop him but couldn't. In interviews conducted with surviving family members of Linda Lamonte, her daughter Sheila Smoke, and earlier victims from the 1960 massacre, a common theme emerges. We weren't just robbed of loved ones. We were robbed of peace, of trust, of feeling safe again. Aaron, the 6-year-old boy who was spared the night his mother and sister were murdered, never publicly spoke about the crime. He was raised by relatives, and by all accounts, grew up carrying a weight he could never put into words. Detectives on the case still recall the scene with visible discomfort. Blood-slick floors, mutilated bodies, and playing cards scattered like a sick joke. "I've seen a lot of death," said one investigator, "but I've never seen evil like that. Not just in what he did, but in how calculated it was." Psychologists later reviewed Brown's case for criminal profiling seminars. They described him as a high-functioning predator, someone with an ability to compartmentalize, mimic empathy, and deceive authority with ease. His crimes were not impulsive. They were methodical, ritualistic, and deeply personal. This wasn't a man who snapped. This was a man who never stopped. And that's the horror of Raymond Eugene Brown. He wasn't lurking in dark alleys or hiding behind locked doors. He was out in the open, working in auto shops, going to church, dating single mothers, and blending into the fabric of normal life. Which begs the question, how many more like him are out there, unnoticed? Raymond's case didn't just break hearts. It broke faith in the system. It forced courts, parole boards, and legislatures to reckon with the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes monsters don't look like monsters. Sometimes they smile, they wait, and they come back. But what haunts people most isn't just what Raymond did. It's that he was given the opportunity to do it again. That must never happen again. If the story gripped you, unsettled you, made you look over your shoulder or question how justice works in our country, don't stay silent. Share this video to raise awareness about parole reform and victim rights. Comment below if you or someone you know has been impacted by violent crime or systemic failure. Subscribe for more in-depth true crime investigations that don't just retell horrors, but demand accountability. Evil like Raymond Eugene Brown doesn't start in the shadows. It grows in plain sight, thrives when no one's watching. Let's change that, together.